Shalom, Namaste, Samadhi, Pak, Salam, Peace, Satnam, So, Kwe, Amani, Udo, Barish, Rini, Pache, Paz, Pe, Fred, Frieden, Vrede, Siuchana, Amir, Amin, Heping, Hewa, Pyungwa, Ngaka, Woman, Jeka, Aloha. Peace, peace. Aho, Om Shanti, 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 Amen. My name is Peter Johansson Osisi, and this is the Jummuah Nikaya on Acharei Mot. This is it. Within Judaism this week, the Parsha in the Torah is Acharei Mot, which includes Vayikra 16:1 a 18:30. Leviticus chapter 16, verse 1 through 18, verse 30. And this is the passage. He shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic, with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. That is Vayikra 16:4, Leviticus chapter 16, verse 4. So, in this Parsha, the Torah basically describes the requirements and process procedures in Aaron becoming the high priest, and this includes particularly making a sacrifice and going through a ceremonial ritual, which might be redundant, but a ritual in becoming the high priest formally. And so this passage describes his the garments, the ceremonial apparel he is to wear in performing this ceremony. So this provides the consideration of just how we each don ourselves with apparel during religious ceremonies, and how our customs, our practices vary from the very simple to the very sophisticated. So, for example, within Judaism in the synagogue, there's the tradition of wearing one's Shabbat best, wearing one's best outfit attending Shabbat services at the synagogue. And then similarly within Christianity, there is Sunday best, wearing one's best apparel when attending worship services on Sunday at church. And then within Islam, there's the Jummuah best, wearing one's best apparel when attending Jummuah prayer, Salat, on Jummuah. So, similarly within additional traditions like Hinduism, Taoism, and additionally, in additional cultures, there are similar protocols for wearing one's best attire during certain ceremonies like weddings and additionally. So, additionally, there's also within many traditions the protocol for wearing very simple attire. For example, within Islam, there is the wearing of the single garment. Single garments, a plain garment, put it like that, when performing Hajj, dressing very modestly. Within the Gospels of Christianity, there's the description of Jesus's single tunic, or tunic is a little bit inaccurate, but robe or garment that is divided amidst his crucifixion. And also John the Baptist is described as wearing very simple attire. Within Hinduism, there's the many sadhus, religious, spiritual ascetics, wear extremely very modest clothing. And even within the Nikaya of Buddhism, there's the description of the Buddha's encounter with naked ascetics. Again, emphasizing this experience of austerity, of even affliction, and simplicity and minimalism. So there's a wide spectrum when it comes to ceremonial attire. within this, even contemporarily, there are certain experiences of extravagance in different ways. For example, without casting shade or being overly critical, but just sharing this consideration, the Pope, historically or frequently, other than just the current Pope, but just popes in the past, also tend to wear or often wear very expensive garments that are designer garments that cost or that are very expensive. Um, Within Judaism, there are what may be considered as rather um, culturally specific extravagances in terms of attire that is worn, including amongst ultra Orthodox Jews. Again, without casting shade, just recognizing the extent of effort and resources even that are utilized in making such distinctions. Also within Christianity, there's what is referred to as I think it's called prosperity gospel preachers, but essentially often preachers who have a congregation that's actually rather um, um, modest in terms of financial resources or material resources, but who preach a gospel of prosperity, meaning that with due discipline and religious um, dedication, and often including providing tithes to the congregation and to the preacher, there's a certain intrinsic promise of experiencing material prosperity. And simultaneously, many of these prosperity gospel preachers oneself have very expensive garments and additional material provisions. And often, and this is evident in additional traditions as well, these are just some examples, but often the rationale for these distinctions, particularly amongst the extravagant apparel, is the notion of the leader being an example, inspiring trust, inspiring confidence amongst the followers. So, all that being said, those are just some considerations. Amidst that, there is also the consideration of balance and modesty. And um, the notion of the holiness that exists other than just with on Shabbat or other on Sunday worship or other on Jummuah or on Upasada days or whenever else, but continually and being appropriately attired for each of these occasions, and how the appropriate attire may very much be other than one's quote unquote best, and even one's best might be extremely modest and moderate. So there's tremendous benefit within this consideration of modesty, the principle of modesty, and the notion of best being other than the most expensive or the finest material or whatever else, but um, um, best being quality, enduring, modesty, and additionally, with regards to this notion of modesty, ironically, modesty may other than necessarily be less. For example, if if we were to look at modesty being less clothing, meaning wearing less material, that might be considered actually immodest. And in many traditions, it is considered immodest. And so, in that sense, modesty may be considered as wearing proficient amount of covering to facilitate proficient concentration and mindfulness. So, those are some general considerations amidst modesty and balance. So, I also share that here within our UNI village in the Coventry area of our Cuyahoga area, we are building a co-op, a fair trade international vegan co-op, and one of the ideas is providing cloth and clothing from different cultures throughout humanity. Um, and part of the interest in doing this is celebrating the differences amongst our different cultures in an authentic and respectful manner, but also, particularly with regards to the fair trade component, providing fair compensation and support for all the providers of the cloth and of the clothing. Those are some considerations from the Torah of Judaism. Within Hinduism and the Bhagavad Gita, the portion for this week is chapter 11, chapter 11, and this is the passage. I see infinite mouths and arms, stomachs and eyes, and you are embodied in every form. I see you everywhere, without beginning, middle, or end. You are the Lord of all creation, and the cosmos is your body. That is the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, verse 16, chapter 11, verse 16. So in this passage, Arjuna is the speaker, and he is talking to his understanding of Sri Krishna. But during this experience, Sri Krishna is transformed in a divine manner, essentially as a representative extension of Brahman. It's very difficult to articulate the definitive boundaries of this identity, but essentially, much like within the Torah of Judaism, how Moshe experiences the vision of Adonai, and Jesus with God in the Gospels of Christianity, this is the cosmic divine vision that Arjuna experiences through the guise of Sri Krishna, who may be considered as a celestial entity that is as I said, perhaps a representative extension of Brahman. That's just the context of this passage. So the consideration I share at this moment from this passage is the notion of infinite mouths. That's the opening of this passage. I see infinite mouths and arms. So immediately, one may consider this notion of infinite mouths pertaining to the immediate surroundings of Arjuna. He is on a battlefield, immersed in this existential, spiritual, transcendent discourse with Sri Krishna. But around him, he is sitting immediately in the middle of a battlefield, and around him are opposing warriors on two sides, on his side and against him. And so there's the consideration of these infinite mouths being the mouths of these warriors engaged in battle. And one may imagine like fierce mouths open and yelling and teeth seething and whatever else. And taking this consideration further, there's understanding of how this can be understood as even other than just the mouths of the warriors on a battlefield. How those actual mouths in an experience of conflict and battle are actually a metaphysical description of the hunger, the spiritual hunger that these warriors are experiencing, and that Arjuna himself is experiencing. And so, rather than the physical, fierce yelling and opening of the mouths, it's a searching, it's a striving, a spiritual striving, a hunger for wisdom and reconciliation and understanding and transcendence. And so that is a consideration specifically regarding mouth. But then there's also this notion of infinite. And that notion of infinite may obviously be applicable to the notion of the number of mouths. But the aggregate, that aggregate experience of infinite mouths has certain applicability to each mouth, meaning that or inferring or conferring an experience of insatiability, that this yearning, this spiritual yearning, this hunger for transcendence and spiritual solace is insatiable. It's infinite, and this seeking of fulfillment is bottomless. So those are some considerations with this notion specifically of infinite mouth. And then, in perhaps what may be considered as a woeful consideration, there's the notion of this yearning as a chauvinistic yearning, and even a chauvinistic yearning for infinity, and extending the context of mouths even further, again in a perhaps woeful chauvinistic manner. There's the consideration of the mouths that women have. I mentioned one type of mouth. There's another mouth that may be considered as well, particularly again in a chauvinistic manner. But again, in a rather perhaps a relevant manner, particularly considering this yearning for infinity. And so, in a similar manner, this notion of the women's mouth or a woman's mouth also has similarly bottomless, endless implications, as there is infinite potential that exists within a woman's womb. Um, so, all this may be considered as being enveloped within the experience of samsara and illusion within this temporal universe, in this temporal realm. And amidst all this, and and that battlefield, amidst that battlefield, or throughout the battlefield, there is the selfishness and the transgressions that are committed as each individual progresses in this experience of yearning. But amidst all of this, there's the consideration of the divine presence. The divine presence that includes the mouths, but also, as the passage describes, the arms, the stomachs, and the eyes. And each of these components of mouths, arms, stomachs, and eyes um, are components within our temporal experience and our temporal interaction. And each of these components has different natures as well as different implications. And the guidance that the Bhagavad Gita provides, that Sri Krishna provides, and that additional religious prophets, teachers, ancestors, sages, and traditions provide is being selfless, is being universally compassionate amongst this infinity of mouths, arms, stomachs, and eyes. And thus, there is the teaching to approach this infinity of mouths, arms, stomachs, and eyes um, with love, with ahimsa, with modesty, and with respect. So that's a consideration from the Bhagavad Gita of Hinduism. Within Buddhism, this week in the Digha Nikaya, the portion for this week is the Janavasabha Sutta, and this is the passage. Long, Master, have I, who am destined not to be reborn in states of woe, been conscious of that destiny. And that is from the Janavasabha Sutta numero 10, verse 10. This passage, the speaker of this passage is actually a former adherent, or an adherent of the Buddha, who progresses into a transcendent realm. And so the Buddha is describing his conversation with this adherent. Previously, Ananda, the Buddha's basically right-hand man, Ananda asks the Buddha about the status, or the experience of loved ones of adherents who previously pass away. And so, in response, the Buddha describes this conversation that he has through his practice of samadhi, and um, and so in this conversation, the Buddha speaks with this adherent who passes from life previously, but describes existing within a transcendent realm. Um, so um, in that conversation, the Buddha's adherent describes having an awareness of experiencing progression towards essentially towards nirvana, and so within the conversation there is the discerning of how that adherent is aware of this. How does the adherent become aware of such a destiny or proclivity or experience? And so that's I mean that's going on and on into the conversation, but basically the adherent says because of the Buddha's teaching, the adherent becomes aware of that, and so there's additional description about the mechanics and nature of that. But I share this with the consideration of what our beliefs are regarding afterlife and how we build confidence and faith within our beliefs regarding the afterlife. Within the spirituality that I practice, my personal belief is that everyone goes to heaven. And that can be understood as attainment of nirvana, union with the Tao, ultimate union with ultimate reality, entering the sovereignty of God. It can be understood synonymously within the different theologies of different traditions. But I believe that everybody ultimately goes back to God, goes to heaven. And this may be considered as very different from many different traditions and religious lineages. And many people may find extreme difficulty with that. This is the belief that I share within my spirituality of the Dharma of Tikkun Olam. And so this is something that a conclusion or an assertion or confirmation that I arrive at as an adult amidst my spiritual progression or progression along my spiritual path. But it's actually excuse me, it's actually a confirmation of a deeply held belief that I have since my earliest memories as a boy. I just am able to have I eventually receive the words and the theological teachings and to articulate this belief, and it's almost other than a belief, it's just an understanding or an awareness. Just like the Buddha's adherent. Like I said, it's something that's always been with me since my earliest recollections, and it's other than just even like a cognitive thought. It's just like an awareness, and so I can articulate it, as I said, with amidst the progression along my spiritual path. I can articulate this in a certain logical manner. There's the notion of omnipotence, just as a concept. When one is being honest, the concept of omnipotence exists, and just so through the very mere concept of omnipotence, there's the consideration of, is omnipotence actual or is it an illusion? And if it's perceived as an illusion, then what is the nature of that illusion for the individual who wants to preserve one's ego and sense of autonomy or control or whatever else? Why would an individual allow such an illusion to exist that challenges that individual's own authority or whatever else? But anyways, I recognize that omnipotence exists. I believe that it is real. I believe that God, Adonai, Brahman, Nirvana, Tao, Wankantanka, Allah is omnipotent and exists beyond my personal, individual, egotistical control and power and authority. So there's that, omnipotence. Then from that, there's the consideration of benevolence. Is God, Adonai, Brahman, Nirvana, Tao, Allah, Wankantanka benevolent? And I believe yes. And so then there's the necessity of reconciling. So why is there so much nasty shit happening in the universe? And so there's the consideration of there being some type of purpose, intent within the experience of dukkha, within the experience of suffering. And so even amidst that benevolence, there is this suffering, but there's the consideration of how that suffering or why that suffering exists. The consideration of how it is exactly through this suffering that we have the capacity to be compassionate towards each other. And that I believe, and this is all a little bit further, a little bit tangential from the consideration of just heaven, but it's relevant. I believe there is purpose in suffering. It gives us the opportunity to provide compassion, and this is exactly the purpose in life. This is our mission in life is to help alleviate dukkha, perform tikkun olam, perform healing, perform compassion, and additionally. And so all of this is part of the purpose in each of our lives. But the consideration is that even when nasty shit happens to benevolent people, there's intention and purpose within that. So amidst this, amidst our experiences of ego, which is very actual, even though I consider it to be illusionary, a pragmatic illusion, there is the semblance of control and everything else that we each perceive ourselves having as extensions of as cognitive sentient beings, respectively connected with different material bodies or entities that seem to respond to our processes of cognition. But ultimately, even amidst this very tangible illusion and semblance of control, I believe that ultimately, as being omnipotent, God, Allah, Brahman, Adonai, Nirvana, Tao, Walkantonka is responsible for everything that happens. Because everything happens exactly according to the will of God, Allah, Brahman, Adonai, Nirvana, Tao, Walkantonka. And so I say that without shirking our responsibility for our actions. I believe in karma, and I believe that we each experience the consequences of our actions in totality, the infinite consequences of our actions, in our thoughts, in our words, before passing from life or before returning to God, Adonai, Brahman, Adonai, Allah, Nirvana, Walkantonka, Tao, the ultimate reality. I say this I say that God is ultimately responsible. I say that without shirking responsibility. I say that, I share that with the consideration of cultivating patience, understanding, compassion, and harmony particularly amongst the actions of others, but also amongst our own actions, and the words and our thoughts of others, and the words and thoughts of others, and the words and thoughts of ourselves. Having compassion, having understanding and patience in dealing with that, understanding that it's all holy, that it's all divine, that it's all part of this process, this purposeful process of life, and being reconciled with the existence that exists beyond ourselves, beyond our individual, personal, physical, and cognitive selves. And to be reconciled with this totality, to be attuned with this universe, and with this harmony, that is the divine. So that's a consideration from Buddhism for this week. Within Christianity, the portion for this week is Luke chapter 13 a 14, chapter 13 through 14, and this is the passage. And men will come from east and west, and from north and south, and sit at table in the sovereignty of God. And behold, some are last who will be first, and some are first who will be last. And that is from Luke 13, 29 a 30, chapter 13, verse 29 through 30. So in this passage, Jesus is essentially describing what may be considered as a messianic period or messianic age of a pervasive reconciliation that occurs after tremendous tumult and tribulation. And so, rather than getting into the note the details or the entrenchments within that message, because for many Christians it's extremely important, and many Christians actually focus excessively on that compared to Jesus' teachings about compassion and reconciliation, which it seems extremely ironic and unfortunate. But that there's that. Anyways, again, zero shade, just perhaps a little bit venting. Love and peace to everybody. I share this with the consideration of the implications of things being shaken up, um, of the shaking up of conventional hierarchies, where some who are perceived as very powerful and benevolent are less benevolent than such individuals appear, and some individuals who are perhaps powerful or oppressed and perceived as malevolent are actually less malevolent than such individuals appear. And this is in reference to the last being first and the first being last, and vice versa. But my main consideration in sharing this is focusing on the notion of the people from the east, the people from the south, the people from the west, and the people from the north. The notion of reconciliation amongst the people from all four corners of the earth, perhaps the universe, all four winds that surround us. And so I share the consideration of what each of our relationships are with the people from the east and the people from the south and the people from the west and the people from the north. Personally, I consider myself to have to be on benevolent terms within people from each of the four directions of the wind, within each of the four corners of the earth, within each of the many directions of the universe. Yet, even amidst these benevolent terms, which I consider to be genuine and actual, this connection, the nature of these relationships that I personally maintain in all these different directions may be considered as comparatively slight or diffuse, or um, I'm trying to think of an appropriate word to describe this, but basically maybe um, diffuse may be increasingly accurate, but the idea is that um, within each of these directions, um, within a close knit village or society or other community, there tends to be a certain experience of solidarity and a strength of solidarity. So, amidst my embrace of the entire Earth and the universe, that might be considered as being that strength of solidarity may be considered as being comparatively modest, and so there are certain challenges with that. And then additionally, having that universal solidarity seems to result in certain strains amongst my loved ones who exist locally, the people that surround me in my physical locality, our majesties who surround me in our physical locality, in my physical locality. Because often there's that expectation of solidarity amongst those who live in the same vicinity as ourselves. So, without me communicating that exclusive solidarity, I do recognize my responsibility and involvement with people that live in my village and immediate vicinity. But, anyways, there is a challenge, and with that being said, it is also appropriate to share for myself personally that the conditions are improving here, and the conditions of that strain are improving. There's an increased amount of um, mutual understanding, respect, even, and amenability and reconciliation. Um, there's still a lot to do. There will always be a lot to do, I believe. but and this is part of the process. So I share one additional consideration regarding this notion of the four winds, and the people in the direction of each of the four winds. I do practice daily a healing prayer from the Lakota tradition, that specifically, in performing this Lakota healing prayer, I concentrate on the beings in the life, the individuals, the people, the animals, and the life and the conditions, um, in each of the four, in each direction of the four winds: east, south, west, and north. And I continue to cultivate this daily practice, but I'm experiencing some resonance, particularly locally, from this, or amidst this, and from this. So that is appreciated. So those are some considerations from Christianity and the Gospels. Within Islam and Quran, the portion for this week is Surah Saba and Surah Fatir, and that is Surah 34 and 35, Surah 34 and 35, and this is the passage. But he had no authority over them, except that we might test the man who believes in the hereafter from him who is in doubt concerning it. And thy Lord doth watch over all things. And that is from Surah 34, 21. So in this passage from the Quran, the surah provides is making reference to the devil, Satan, Iblis, and the influence that Satan has over individuals. And throughout the Quran, there are numerous references and teachings regarding Iblis, Satan, and the relationship between Satan and Allah, and the relationship between or Iblis and Allah, and the relationship between Satan, Iblis, and humanity. And so this teaching may be considered in the context of this. That being said, this particular passage provides an interesting consideration that emphasizes the impotence of Iblis, of Satan, and describes Satan essentially as a tempter or an influencer, rather than an entity that has any form of compulsion, or even power necessarily. And some may argue the notion of influence is power, but the consideration, and there's legitimacy within that. That's why I kind of regress at this moment from just explicitly saying power. The point is that Satan abstains from having a direct power over other individuals, over any individual, and that there's only that experience of temptation. And this might be considered similar, very similar, even synonymous with the teachings in Buddhism regarding Mara, the tempter, even teachings within the Torah of Judaism, and practiced within Christianity as well, regarding Satan as the tempter in the Garden of Eden. And so there's that consideration of less on the personification of an Iblis or a Satan or devil per se, but increasingly on that experience of temptation that each of us experiences. So rather than scapegoating some personified being for our transgressions, it's a matter of recognizing that it's simply a transpersonal experience of temptation itself that exists within each of us. There's an example within a certain teaching in Islam about a man and a woman who are unmarried, and the saying goes that when a man and a woman are alone in a room, Satan is the third party, meaning that there is temptation amongst them, and so the point of that teaching is to emphasize modesty, to avoid temptation, to avoid circumstances where one may be discouraged into inappropriate behavior, and to take proactive, preemptive measures of discipline, of modesty, to minimize that exposure and susceptibility to temptation. And so that's the consideration I share within this passage, is that susceptibility to temptation. We each, rather than blaming Iblis, Satan, the devil, for our transgressions, we each have a decision. We each have an authority. And just a few moments ago, I talked about ego and control as an illusion. But I hold to that. I talk about the omnipotence of God, Allah, and I hold to that as well. But there's a consideration that there is this semblance of control that we each experience. There is this ego. There is this cognitive process that is connected with our material experience. And so it's a pragmatic illusion. Both are very applicable. Both are very relevant and tangible. And so there's the consideration of cultivating within ourselves a mindfulness, a discipline, a modesty that is increasingly resilient against the different forms of temptation that we experience. And reconciling and attuning our egos, and particularly within this consideration of ego, I'm emphasizing our material existence as well as our sensory experiences, attuning all of this, for the higher purpose of life, the divine, compassionate purpose and mission that we each are charged with in this temporal experience, in this life. So even in taking me at my word about ego and control, personal control being an illusion, and including the consideration of Satan, and including these notions of decision and authority, there's a consideration that amidst all of this, there is divine presence and there is divine guidance to progress beyond this concept and the influence of Satan, of Mara, of the devil, of Iblis, of temptation, and to be patient, understanding, compassionate, and forgiving for ourselves and for others as we each stumble and recover in this process. So that is a consideration from Islam and the Quran for this week. Within Taoism and the Tao Te Ching, the portion for this week is chapter 7 at 12, chapter 7 through 12, and this is the passage. The highest benevolence resembles water. Water greatly benefits myriad things without contention. It stays in places that people dislike. Therefore, it is similar to the Tao. Because it does not contend, it is therefore beyond reproach. And that is from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 8, 1 a 4 y 12 a 13. Chapter 8, verse 1 through 4, and verse 12 through 13. So, from this passage, I share the consideration of three mindsets. One mindset is that of the conquistador. And that mindset of the conquistador being concerned with supporting one's family, which is very relevant and appropriate, but doing so through the pursuit of building empire, through ascending the ranks, attaining power, influence, riches, through exactly the conquest of others. And so there is that mindset of the conquistador that exists today in many different forms, whether it's corporate, religious, governmental, and additionally, there is that mindset of the conquistador. So a second mindset is that of the middle class. And so within this mindset of the middle class, there is aversion towards the mindset of the conquistador. There is aversion towards that type of the transgressions, the cutthroatness, figuratively and literally. In being a conquistador, the mindset of the middle class abstains from wanting to do that. However, the within the mindset of the middle class, there is that recognition of the efficacy of the conquistador, and the influence of the conquistador, and so there is a certain acquiescence to that mindset of the conquistador, and there is, to varying degrees, a sense of compromise, and assimilation within that mindset of the conquistador. That is the mindset of the middle class, and so it is a commitment to settle, and settle and work within the machine. Um, Often, within the middle class mindset, this decision to settle, to compromise, to settle and work within the machine is done with the intention of gaining power, influence, and eventually practicing philanthropy, working within the system to change the conditions of all people, but wanting to attain power and influence, or at least a sufficient amount of power and influence to again sustain oneself and one's family, but also to be able to determine certain policy, and maybe throw in a kind word to the conquistadors on the benefit of those lower in the ranks. That's the mindset of the middle class. The third mindset that I share is at this point, and that I describe at this point. Perhaps all three types of mindsets are applicable to all of us. And this is different from the three gunas. So I just provide that as a side note. So the third mindset is that of the liberal, and so the liberal, actually, the mindset of the liberal is actually to overthrow the conquistador, and essentially to impose a progressive ideology. So intrinsically, even within the mindset of the liberal, there is a tendency, there is a conquistador-like tendency, and tenacity even. And so those are the three mindsets that I share, that I describe, or I share for consideration. I provide for consideration. So amidst all of that, and obviously there are people who may be considered outside, different, or whatever else, but I think this describes much of humanity in different contexts, to varying degrees. So amidst all that, there's the consideration of the teaching that Gandhi provides about being the change that we want to see in the universe. So the notion is, rather than trying to influence others, to gain power over others, and to become powerful, to effectuate positivity, the consideration is simply doing what it is we believe, and that in itself is extremely difficult. And so and therein is the whole point, because we can spout on for days and for lifetimes about what other people are doing wrong, but it's increasingly appropriate and increasingly difficult to change what we're doing ourselves, and how we contribute to the conditions. But that's exactly the point. Each of us is a sovereign. Each of us is the purveyor of a realm that surrounds us, with individuals responding to how we behave in one way or another. So there's the consideration of changing what we each do to effectuate the ideals, the principles, the righteousness, the love that we want to experience in the universe. So Lao Tzu describes in this passage the lowliness and the humility of water, and how elsewhere within the Tao Te Ching there's the description of how water seeks the lowest places, and there is an intrinsic flexibility, literally fluidity, and even harmony that exists within this nature of water. But there's also a resiliency, and there's a triumph that exists within this experience and within the very nature of water. Elsewhere within the Tao Te Ching, there is Lao Tzu teaches about how like other phenomena within the universe, um, how the subtlety of water overcomes the forcefulness of other phenomena. And part of the nature of water is that it sustains others. It supports others, and there's value in this. And um, part of the nature of the resiliency of water is that it is irreplaceable. And so, from that, there's the consideration that each of us has a unique gift and talent to provide the universe, and to benefit the universe. And that unique gift and talent that we each possess is irreplaceable and unsubstitutable. Um, some gifts may be very widely recognized and evident and obvious, whether it's athleticism or intellect or compassion or something else, musical ability, and additionally, there are individuals who have talent that is very obvious to others, and that is and very often sometimes and occasionally, there are individuals that have such talent that is very obvious to others, and that is very that others are able to recognize as being extremely rare and unique. And so sometimes the word genius is applied to such individuals to describe that comparative notion of, or that notion of comparative rarity and uniqueness. But each of us has that in one way or another, and often that experience of uniqueness, that irreplaceability within our gift, within our talent, is contextualized within our respective circumstances. Within our respective experiences, our temporal experiences, and particularly within our own respective circles of loved ones, family members, friends, and additionally. Yet it's just as extraordinary, it's just as holy as anyone else's talent. And there is encouragement for us to consider this talent, this talent that we each have, and to contribute that talent. So that's a consideration from the Tao Te Ching. And with that, this concludes this session of our Jummuah Nikaya series, and I share love and peace to you.